Hello, and welcome to Varn Blog Solo. Now that's what I call camera's gonna screw that up. Now that's what I call dudes screaming at each other. Or actually, it's not. That's what I call dudes yelling. Here's to 45. I'm officially 45 years old. So if I make it to 90, we're halfway there. Odds are in my family I don't make it to 90. We're just going to be open about that. We're probably more than halfway through here, but nonetheless, we'll just call this middle age. So I woke up, got on X for whatever dumb reason I got on X. I should avoid X, particularly on days. And I saw people talking about Graham Platner. Now, Graham Platner is a guy that I weirdly started getting ads for on Instagram and Facebook, and they weren't ads. They were promoted posts to social media, but they were clearly for how he was going to fight for, progressive values in Maine and blah, blah, blah. I didn't think much of it except, odd that I in Utah am getting these ads that aren't ads, but clearly should be marked as political advertising. Interesting. That happened about a month ago. I didn't think it that much of it. Just like I get stuff from John Ossoff. That's another nationalized Democrat senatorial campaign. I have never voted for John Ossoff. I haven't lived in Georgia in nigh a generation almost. I left Georgia in 2009. I haven't been on Georgia voter roll since 2012, I think. Maybe 2016. Although my absentee ballot got thrown out in 2016, so I don't know. But at least that one sort of makes sense. So we come in, I get to Platner, and I hear the stuff about the Totenkopf tattoo. Now, I will admit that this lost me because I saw it first from people around the Marxist Unity group. Now, I'm not saying this is a Marxist Unity position because it is not. This is an individual speaker. This is Parker McQueening defending this as some kind of faux controversy. Now, one, I do not for a moment buy that a Totenkopf tattoo from a dude in the military who left the military in 2011 but worked for one of the fifth or sixth incarnations of Blackwater called Constellius and went back to Afghanistan in 2018, and who comes from a blue-collar but wealthy background and has a lot of money, doesn't consider himself a communist or a socialist in any way, form, or fashion, and is not endorsed by the DSA in any way, form, or fashion, either in Maine or at the national level. Why are we wasting political capital on this dude who had a Totenkopf? And like I said, I don't believe for a moment that he wouldn't know that that was associated with at least the Wehrmacht and not, if not the SS, because I used to work at a military academy. They know. Right? So I'm here to tell you that, but I don't think the dude's a secret fascist or anything. I think what people don't want to confront here is like this like warrior edgelord mentality in parts of the military. You see different Hexef's faux crusade tattoos that also make him look like an Aryan Nation reject. Is from a toxic and right-wing culture, and even if you come out of it and reject it, you do have to acknowledge it for what it was. Now, I say this because I know I'm problematic too. I used to work for a prison. I have been surrounded by ex-vets all my fucking life. And I even worked for my first teaching gig was at a military academy, a military college to be precise. You know, so I'm not here to defend Platner because actually what bothers me more is the stint for a BlackRock rebranding, not BlackRock, excuse me, a Blackwater rebranding called Constellius. Way more than a dumb tattoo choice that has fascist implications. But I get mad at people being so opportunistic as to pretend that people wouldn't have known what this was associated with. But what I really don't fucking get is why would democratic socialists of either the Jacobin or the Marxist unity variety especially be getting involved in a culture comp over a non-endorsed, not self-identified socialist in a state they can't fucking vote in? For the people who keep on telling me we need to protect our electeds or we need to discipline our electeds, this guy isn't even your elected. Why are you wasting capital on this? You don't have to side with, the woke leftover on Bluesky, which is what I got accused of. I mean, almost immediately, like, you're no different from a Bluesky liberal. And I'm like, oh, a Bluesky liberal would tell you that 1, the Democratic Party is world historically useless. 2, there are no good options here. 3, left populism is a craven waste of time because it has no programmatic basis. 4, that the woke scolds and the counter woke scolds are engaging in the same game. That sure fucking sounds like a Bluesky liberal. A lot of people had not heard of Platner until the tattoo fiasco, which is a way to get him national attention. And he covered it up with an even stupider looking Celtic tattoo. It's really bad. But again, I started seeing ads for Platner in Utah, which tells me that this is not some kind of grassroots. I'm going to let the camera do its thing. This is not some kind of grassroots organization. Someone is promoting these posts to faraway people who are marked on the algorithms as progressives, who cannot vote in Maine, which tells me this is partly about a coordinated national effort to change the narrative of the Democratic Party now that the Schumer faction is going tits up publicly. Now, you guys can like Platner or not. I don't think this is an issue that in and of itself about the stupid tattoo is worth expending a lot of social capital on, although apparently today I've had to do so because I've been shocked at the response to me being skeptical about why socialists would give a shit one way or the other. Why is it that democratic socialists would care? I mean, I don't know that he's a Blackwater op or isn't a Blackwater op. He hadn't worked for them in a long time, but I would not trust anyone who worked with intelligence agencies that recently, particularly after saying in 2012 that he thought the Afghan war was a fiasco and shouldn't have been done. Now, there's other things that have come out about his statements on Reddit. The post on when they happened, I see some people say they were very recent, some people saying they're in 2010. I can't tell. But why waste your capital in this? Why? And particularly, I mean, I might get why my friend Ben Burgess might do it because he's got a soft spot for left populists because he, I think, game theoretically mistakenly, thinks that could be a wedge. I can see Lee Phillips doing it because he did, but also because Lee Phillips would be more appalled by Platner's left populist positions on environmental development more than he would be appalled by symbolic issues. But I don't know why other forms of DSA wouldn't. When the DSA has gone out of its way saying Platner hasn't sought an endorsement, Platner's never claimed to be affiliated. This reeks to me of like explaining political capital on Fetterman or on Christian Cinema, all of which had red flags, but all of which had Bernie and stuff behind them too. It's the main issue. It's a main issue. But if you want to, this is my whole point about obstructionary politics that I've made on the show multiple times now. I know that my solos get less views these days now that they're positive. People like them more, but they don't watch them because you're addicted to drama, seemingly. But nonetheless, well, maybe not you guys because you're here today, but in general. You can't control these people. You can't hold them accountable. You don't even have a platform to hold them accountable to. Yes, Zane, Stephen King is from Maine. Very much from Maine. Right. And if you want to be on like high tier resistance lib, you go read what King this. Right. Why are we expending any capital? Because we think that we're going to win some war against the woke culture comp that's already mostly been defeated. I know that people like Freddie DeBoer really think this is something worth continuing to fight out, but even he's kind of admitted lately that things are bad and that's a distraction. Now, conversely, now I'm going to turn on the flip side of this. And this is why there's people afraid I've secretly become a blue sky liberal. Let me reassure you about where I actually feel. There's been a lot of pressure from a lot of friends of mine to not criticize anyone associated with the No Kings protest or anything that's anti-authoritarian. And why? Because if it tries to normalize the authoritarians' policies like the last round did, right? Because they don't feel like they could do what it would take to shore up the old institutional orders simultaneously while trying to run a more interventionist state capital. Like, why on earth would I not criticize the people doing that? Because that's just allowing things to move right. Why on earth would I ignore that the predominant voices on MSNBC, people that I listen to get what progressives now think, are mostly former neoconservatives? Literally, not even hiding anymore. That's what they are. Sure, a lot of them have said, let's take the heat off Mamdani, but also Mamdani's playing by the rules a little bit more these days too, isn't he? Let's not fight this left populist insurgency, but we got to focus on things like beating Donald Trump and not things like kitchen table issues because they don't matter. And that's not why Trump got the 3 or 4% of the populace that threw him over to win. You know, No Kings is like the Tea Party, right? It might have some valid points in it, but it's already astroturfed. Now, again, I'm friends with a lot of social democrats, so a lot of people assume that I'm on their team, which I am. They are allies, I guess. but this shit is getting old to me. Right? If you don't want people to fight the culture war, don't fight the culture war. And that includes not defending people who, I don't know, had Totenkopf tattoos at one point in their life, who won't go into why they disowned it entirely and just pretend like they didn't know. Right? We already know about the chorus scandal. For those of you who don't know, and that's the fact that there's tried to be a progressive AstroTurf like commentariat on the short video socials that has millionaire and billionaire backing. Right? I'm not saying that you don't need millionaire and billionaire backing, but it's incredibly incompetent in a lot of ways. You know, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, like, we should be really thinking about all these like abundance people who are trying to run techno neoliberalism, but promise some end on the macro economy that's going to raise everybody up, a la Reagan trickle down economics somehow. But with a more safety net. Which, by the way, if people had any memory of the 70s, they would know that's what neoconservatism started as, but as a war project. Now, there's no war project here because we don't have major industrial developers who want to use war as a means of, you know, getting government contracts. The best way to get government contracts is run surveillance mechanism and tech stuff. Same game, different strategy, different technology. But one doesn't employ that many people, and the other at least did. Every peaceful protest being AstroTurf, that's a mere technicality. Look, I'm going to tell you my thing about protests. They're for the people protesting. They don't change society anymore, if they ever did. I don't know how many times I've have to say this in the course of 20 fucking years that I've said this. I'm 45. I started saying this in my 20s. That if you look at the history of protests, they were to do two things, which is why they're mentioned in the Constitution. They were to prove that you could field a disciplined army, that you could turn a riot into a insurrectionary force. That's what they were about. And you protested peacefully, so you didn't take up arms. It was basically proof that you had the people to run a militia. The 1950s changed all that. One, the examples of the civil rights movement always ignore the fact there was both an external militant threat, two of them, both the Soviet and the Chinese bloc, and an internal militant threat that made them scary, which is why people like the Birchers like to call them communist. Some of them were. Right? But two, the other thing that is different is that those movements had clear fucking demands that weren't just like, I don't know, get Eisenhower out of office. And yes, the protests after 1965 largely didn't work, which led to more and more spectacular politics. I know everybody's rediscovered the Weathermen, and we're trying to convince me that they actually achieved something a couple of weeks ago, because not all their bombing campaigns killed their own people. Only 3 of them, maybe 4. Thank you, people resuscitating 80s movie, 80s books about the failure of the new left, as if the millennial left was that. I mean, in a way, it was. I mean, because its leadership ended up being replaced by Gen Xers, many of whom died young, like David Graeber, with literal boomers who were the young reformist has-beens after the new communist movement who came back, who everybody loves now, even though Matt Chrisman will say that the Bernie thing was a mirage. And you know what? I've not gotten an apology from a lot of those people from how they treated me for saying that in 2016. And even then, I thought that Mirage came from organic wants of real people and that Bernie was probably sincere. I actually granted them all that. It still didn't change what I said. Now, Chrisman didn't attack me. I'm going to be good. Chrisman's a good guy. I call him prophet for a reason. He's a moral man. Ben is a friend of mine. Ben Burgess. A lot of my fans hate him. I obviously don't. I think that the realm of socialist acceptable discussion has to include him. But let's be real here for a minute. What did the millennial left, to steal a phrase from our old friends over at the Monotream Associated grouping, actually achieve? Reinvigoration of the center of the Democratic Party is what it actually achieved. I want you to hear that again, because I said this in 2018. The most likely outcome of this movement was the reinvigoration of the center of the Democratic Party. If either Bernie ran and failed because he didn't have a big enough moment to pull off what he wanted to do in the House because he didn't have enough organic institutions of any size. And when we talk about organic institutions, parties are groupings or sects or whatever of 5,000 people and mass membership organizations that aren't parties of 100,000 people, actually 80,000 people at this time, are still drops in the fucking bucket of a country that is 320 million people strong. Or weak, as this may be. Actually, I shouldn't say strong. So you reinvigorated the center of the Democratic Party, and what did they do with it? In 2 years, they lost worse and more world historically and more world historically than Democrats have since the fucking Reagan period. Actually, since 1994 will probably actually be the best thing. But Clinton could triangulate. Biden could not. Now, Clinton triangulated for evil reasons. I mean, let's not pretend that was a good period of U.S. politics. But he could do it. Oh man, so that I have a bunch of things that I haven't gotten to yet. One, I'm going to start with some things I saw on the tech bubble, on the AI bubble. It hasn't popped yet, and it might take a while to pop. And I don't know that we're going to know how it is going to pop. But if it pops, it's going to be more like 1971 than 2008 and 1929. And the reason why is that these are overvalued stocks that are juking, where Nvidia is juking the revenue for all of them, and even they are admitting it. They're admitting it because they know it's coming, but they don't know when it's going to come. You have two problems with AI. If it works, it creates a mass unemployment crisis. If it doesn't work, you have almost negative growth in the economy retrospectively, and you have a mass unemployment crisis and a declining population. And that's important, right? That's important to find out. One of the people have asked me, like, well, why aren't we seeing the historical levels of unemployment? I don't know. Lots of people over 65 are leaving the labor market. It was the largest generation in literal fucking history that's dying now. You would think maybe that would mitigate against unemployment stats. And that's not even figuring out how the unemployment stats are juked for people who just give up in long-term unemployment. The identity data centers are going to raise everyone's bills because simultaneously as they're doing this, Trump is installing price floors and taking away alternate methods of increasing the grid capacity for reasons that don't make sense. I agree with you that the AI unemployment crisis is bad because it actually is going to affect all the economy, even what's left of the public sector, which is also being decimated right now for obvious reasons. We have an overinflated credit market. We are beginning to show signs of housing market weakening, which also probably won't go in your favor. Everyone thinks that you can buy up bunches of housing stocks in a downturn. Some lucky people can if they have stellar credit going into it. But the beginning of the mass corporate ownership of houses that we know today, it was held as investment collateral. Would you like to know when that started? Around 2010. No, you're living in a time where you have kleptomaniac state capitalist interventions in the West, less kleptomaniac, but still state capitalist interventions in other places, some of which may hope to transition to socialism someday and may be worth defending, may not be. I'm not here to make a moral or political judgment on what hasn't happened yet. All right. But that is the way that the entire world economy is working. The more neoliberalized you were, the less able you are to do it, because not because neoliberalism was some kind of divorce of the state from capitalism. If you actually studied it at all, Murawski, Winant, almost anybody, you would realize that sort of David Harvey, it's just the privatization of everything narrative was never true. It was about marketizing non-marketizable things by public-private partnerships, which was an extension of the public-private partnerships on Fordism. Now, today what you have is that in hyper decay. But that means you need more shit like things that developing countries rightly knew they needed to do to protect their nascent industries, to develop their own productive capacities. You're now seeing that being attempted in the cores of everywhere. Alex Ochili over at BungaCast calls this peripherization of the core, which I think is actually kind of true. So yeah, I mean, if you want to go back to where I started, if you want to defend Platner's Totenkopf, that's fine. It's weird. It's a weird hill to die on. I don't get why you're doing it, but like arguing that he is somehow an explicit secret Nazi without further evidence than that is weird. Although you really do need to start asking yourself, why was this normalized in military culture? Dan Caldwell, of all people, pointed this out, and people like, didn't ask that. But there's a lot more to be worried about there. And if you want to wait and see, you want to be like, we're not going to obstruct Caldwell, that's fine by me. right? But don't waste your political capital protecting him when he's not even your guy. Literacy is declining in bourgeois, so cut the PhD programs too. I mean, the problem is that the PhD programs weren't necessarily increasing literacy from their marketization. I mean, I actually almost got in an argument with Doug Henwood about this on X, because Doug Henwood was talking about the stupefaction of America. And I was like, well, maybe you should look at why the institutions alienated everybody. And it wasn't just woke culture. Like, it was the fact that they were blatantly meeting diversity quotas by accepting rich immigrants. It was the fact, which I'm not against, immigrants coming to the United States, before people interpret me as saying that. It's just, if you're pretending like you're helping inner city people of color, and what you're actually doing is increasing your full tuition paying Nigerian and East Asian contingency and calling that diversity, you're an asshole. All right. Furthermore, if you look at what most of the universities did, it wasn't like they're bad elite woke papers, because it's not like Berkeley doesn't do real scientific research, and it's not like Berkeley is a fucking private university. It's a land grant college. The endowment logic was allowed for everybody. It is the most at the private non-for-profit institutions, but it's nearly universal at every major institution. Almost every major institution in the country is a major landlord in the city that they live in. Columbia and NYU are the biggest landlords in fucking New York. No, the guy with the token cough is not DSA. It's just a regular old progressive liberal. It seems to be anti-Afghan war, maybe for like Medicare for all, but that's vaguely defined because people can throw that fucking slogan around and not define what it means. Has a sketchy past, has a petite bourgeois, blue collar background, but with money. The question you got to ask now. And people are like, we should jettison Berkeley. I'm not here to tell you what you should do or not do about Berkeley, but I can tell you the problem isn't just wokeness. Do you know how much of even the left that you guys like is from those institutions, by the way? Seriously. I'm a former academic too. Most of the people on the left are, but like a whole lot of the major podcasters were clearly groomed to be political operatives in a normal Democratic Party to get posted MSNBC, and there weren't jobs for them. Are you fucking stupid? Are there comedians who became millionaires off of political commentary and not their comedy? Now, I'm not talking about Sam Cedar. He became a millionaire off of movies in the 90s. Bloggers. I talked about this with bloggers, and this was before even the whole wokeness spreading through Tumblr thing. What happened with bloggers was an overproduction of humanities academics in the late aughts. I know, I was one of them. But most of them came from fairly elite backgrounds and could not yet get work, or they got work at undesirable posts like University of Cairo, or they were like me, like I was at a university in South Korea, because there was no jobs for us in the United States. They had pushed a lot of people, both downwardly mobile and people like me who were coming from the blue collar parts of the world. And I say that because I say blue collar specifically because people talk about this PMC, anti-PMC thing. And I want to be very clear. I might be what you consider PMC. I'm an educated person but I'm from a state school. I'm a high school teacher. I'm not an elite anything. And I bring this up, okay, because I have the cultural habitus of a blue collar person. Now, that's not something Marxists are actually all that concerned with, for good or ill, because that's not what I do in my daily life. Um, and the other thing I'll tell people about this is hitching your brand as an internal opposition usually makes you big very briefly, but you get liquidated in long term, both on the left and the right. Like, think about what the hell happened to the Tea Party. Are its key leaders? Have you heard about most of them recently? What do you think will happen to MAGA afterwards? Or on the other side, because they'll pretend like I was listening to Fair and Balanced, you former Ring of Fire guy, because I listen to progressives whenever I want to hurt myself. Um, and to understand where people who are adjacent to me are coming from, right? And I was just kind of taken aback about how like they don't know how to deal with any of this, and then they'll pretend like this only happens on the right. The right has these cult movements that work up, and then they get recuperated and dissipate, and they go away, and that'll happen with MAGA too. And I'm like, that only happens on the right, friendo? Huh? Huh? You don't remember MoveOn.org? You don't remember Daily Coast? I mean, Daily Coast is still around, but who gives a shit? Um, you don't remember Alternet? You don't remember the anti-war movement? That's why I started being very clear. I used to call these like failed anti-systemic movements, but I changed to calling them thermostatic movements because they're not anti-systemic. They're just pushing in the other direction on the thermostat of current elites. You just pick a different set of elites to fucking follow. The anti-war movement has always been co-opted by sure. Oh, for sure. Right? My point in all this is you can get stuck in this moment that is kind of a diffuse spectacle. And I use that term very advisedly from De Boer. All right. But you're captured when you get stuck in these moments. And what I worry about the democratic socialist movement, in so much that it's ever been a thing, is that my fear in 2014, when I was in my wee young 30s, was that the democratic socialist movement was a way to convince people they were standing up to the Democratic Party, but actually reinvigorating them with an internal debate that didn't go anywhere, which is by and large what the Popular Front did, what in America, we're not gonna go everywhere. It's what the New Left did in a completely different way. Is Guy Debord still discussed? Not actually in lefty circles as much, honestly, no. Some anarchist circles. The Populist Party did it in the 19th century. I've actually brought that up, that people are like, oh, we need to return for the Populist Party. I'm like, how did that end? Well, its sharecropper base got liquidated by capital, not by reforms. And some of it became socialist, and most of it re-entered the reactionary at the time Democratic Party. Now, I know what I'm telling people to do is hard. It may be too fucking late. Let's be honest. Let's be very clear about that. Francisco Borja, I don't know if you're Italian or not, and also you know what I do to Latinate languages. Yeah, a lot of you are like, it's too late. It might be too late. It might be too late. Too late in what way? Well, one, let's just go through the conditions that you live under right now. It is not just that the labor movement is politically weak but popular. It is that the very institutions that labor movements depended on to be able to be mass have been diffused by a change in the centralization of production. Instead of being centralized in a factory, it is centralized in a computer hub. So it is a centralization of production and monopolization of power, but a decentralization in terms of temporality and in terms of who's operating what, which is why the public sector unions have had an easier time of it, because those institutions, being that they are involved in services that have to be administered on scales of, on relatively mass scales, still operate in large institutional frameworks, whereas almost everything else has been compartmentalized to shit and back. During the Biden administration, particularly the early part, there was all this talk, even by normie Democrats around Ezra Klein, about the growth of unions, where there was literally no evidence for it. And it had Vox sounding like Jacobin magazine. And no one thought that was weird, except for me. Well, there's a few other people, but very few people actually said much about it. And I was like, Now, I'm not saying Starbucks people don't need unions. I'm not opposed to them doing whatever they need to get better working conditions and contracts. But it's not going to work with franchisees. And if you have 250 new union applications to the NLRB, but all of them are of shops of 16 to 40 people, you aren't doing what you think you're doing. Now, the one thing I'm going to tell the other side of this, the people who think we can have our Fordism back, it's never coming back. The organic composition of capital, aka the need of fixed capital, has lowered the socially necessary labor time to the point that you don't need that many people to make the same shit, and you can exploit people and even pay them a little higher because you're making so much per unit. But the competition on the market, unless you can turn it into rents, is so high that your profitability is going to drop, and you don't have anything to make you competitive anymore. So what you're going to do is seek out rents, which, lo and behold, almost better than any other theory out there on economics, is what we're fucking seeing. And no, this isn't neo-feudalism or techno-feudalism. It is monopsony capital, and it's happened several times in capitalist history. And you know what's broken it up in the past? Rebellions and wars. Tenant renters unions are a more viable means of organizing people, but with less efficacious means of fighting back. Denying people rent will never shut down the economy, particularly when you can write the entirety of the rent as a tax write-off on profits. Which, by the way, is why YIMBYism might stabilize rents, but it doesn't break them down. So neither will a rent strike. I hate to tell you that you've been sold a lot of populist bullshit from people who don't know what they're talking about, even when they have PhDs, but you have. What if there's a depression? Well, there's a depression. Good fucking luck. You know what? And this is something Marx even made the mistake of doing. The idea that a depression would lead to an economic, even progressive, much less communist revolution, was something that Marx put his hopes on in the 1850s. He ate those words. I got in an argument with Andrew Kleinman once about this because he said Marx never contradicted himself on this fact. And I was like, he sure as fuck did. And he changed his opinion. And it's not just in his writing, it's how he organized. His level of organization changed. Depressions don't always go in the way of the mass revolt of the proletariat. In fact, if it did, you wouldn't have this really uncomfortable truth for socialists. one that Marxist Leninists are actually a little bit right about, and actually, oddly, also their enemies, the communizers, are right about, that most of the workers' revolutions of the 20th century were mostly led by peasants who didn't get rid of the proletariat, they got rid of the peasantry. And created national, basically liberal subjects. Even I don't mean liberal in the ideological sense. They may have been, they might have been sincerely ideologically communist. That's not my point. I mean that they created the need for mass marketization and to participate in the global economy on a market basis. Depression and accelerationism cuts in so many different ways, you can't predict where it goes. And historically, it has cut right more than left, more than not. It's not always cut in any one direction. That's why Lenin came up with the subjective, objective conditions thing, so that you wouldn't just be dependent on hoping that things work because economy makes it work that way, even though over and over again it doesn't. So I guess we just develop an eschatology about when the workers' movement does what we say it does, even when it doesn't, over and over again, and just wait for it for fucking ever. Sorry, this stuff actually does make me mad. Why is the American left so weak? Why is most left so weak? I actually want to tell you. I want to talk about this. The American left is weak because of the inability of unions to overcome political opposition in the 1950s. Ironically, because of the social compacts they made in the Popular Front period, which was when they were most popular in the United States. But it's not just the American left is so weak. The British left is arguably weaker. And they were stronger going into the last 2 decades. Now, where are they? Where are they? Corbyn hasn't just embarrassed himself by losing with more support than Keir Starmer won with, which people somehow think is a good thing for Corbyn. But no, our party pretty much proved that he's not really a good leader of an opposition movement. That shit liquidated itself. You didn't need all the conspiracies and stuff that the Blairites threw at him and Labor to undo our party or your party. I'm European. I figured Francisco from your name, but you could have been Latin American, so I'll give you that. We have a legacy of social democratic institutions that keep going on, but they're hollow husk. In society, the left is dying all over Europe. In fact, my frustration with the American left is they're still fetishizing a European social structures that are decaying where they're happening at. Because they're less decayed than ours, and we never had them in the first place. The mayor of Chicago called for a general strike. This is more how little labor influence has now than more than ever. Yeah. At risk of sounding like Benjamin Studebaker, who I don't always agree with on a lot of things, you're going to have to give up hope in order to find it. There are nascent things that might be helpful. Tenants organizations, maybe co-ops to reskill the labor, like parts of the labor force and doing things again, but none of that is mass scalable to a political movement. And right now, you're going to need social institutions that allow a full-scale political movement to happen internally to these centers of capital. And I hate to tell you, the odds of that aren't good. They're not good. What kind of organizing do you see working nowadays? And thank you for your input. You're always so informative. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know. I mean, I can tell you what I believe. I can tell you what I try to do. I work with worker centers, which have their strategic problems. I'm a member of a union. I'm a union rep too. I'm not just a dues paying member, right? Like I've been elected. Um, uh, my shop isn't huge. My shop, we don't even refer to it as that. In fact, they won't even let us call ourselves union rep. We're supposed to call ourselves association reps. But my union, like if I stopped everything right now, it would hurt production because people would have to take care of their kids. But maybe they'll probably just throw them in front of fucking screens. That's what we're doing now anyway. When I go into a classroom now, I teach online. Okay, I also teach in person and I tutor in person, but I teach online primarily. I won't go into where I work. We keep that very distinct, but I want to make this very clear to you. I was shocked in going into an in-person classroom post 2020 and seeing that they were doing less interactive Canvas assignments than I design online and just holding the kids captive while they do it and not even really paying attention to what's coming up on their computers. Do you know how bad that is? I don't want to throw my colleagues under the bus. They're doing this under the pressures of administration who increasingly tell us we need to incorporate more and more AI into our pedagogy, despite the evidence that it's actually damaging, which they'll even admit. But it's if I was a kid right now, I would I don't know what I would do. I mean, most of them can't think. I shouldn't say that it's not that, but they don't. I shouldn't say can't. They don't. A lot of the Zoomers that I'm with, I trick with simple prompt changes. Like I'll just, I put like I use AI too, not to design all my lessons. That's ridiculous. But a lot of the lessons designs aren't good. But I use it to check prompts and stuff. And I'll just change a few things in the prompt, which will confound a chatbot, and the kids won't notice it. And even though they can redo the work, they don't, even when they fail. And I'm not like failing them for getting a bad grade. I'm failing them for making a mistake that only a chatbot will make, like mentioning the wrong text because I use two texts with the same name. A lot of the kids were already encouraged to stop assigning homework a long time ago. This is a movement from Alfie Cohen, and it's coincided with the AI thing. I'm going to tell you my opinion about this. Progressive education has been a fucking disaster. I almost sound like a reactionary when I talk about education. Not because I care about like, we have to fight liberal cultural values. That's not what I care about. I care that the kids can't fucking read. That they're coming to me sometimes as late as 12th grade with a literacy that is sub fourth, fifth grader. And I'm going to tell you this was true before AI. The Flynn effect, the generational increase of IQ. All right, now I'm not here to argue about whether or not IQ is an unbiased test. It's not, but it does measure something. It has racial biases because all choices of language have racial biases. including the ones that we use to assign grades with. But nonetheless, not here to defend an IQ test, but there was a measurable increase in all races, abstract reasoning on an IQ test until 2007. And now in the developed world, we don't see that anymore. Isn't that due to the family when a parent teach a child how to read? Not really. Parents teaching children how to read is a generational thing that if you read the research from the Harlem Children's Project, which has its own problems, right? But we have like generationally impoverished people don't teach their children how to read. Does human intelligence have a plateau? Maybe actually, maybe we do. I mean, I don't know. I suspect we do. And I'm not here to say like there's 1,000 reasons for it. All right. One, the family wage was always shitty and motivating and trapped women in bad relationships, but it was a family wage. When that went away, both partners had to work. And we put that, it was sold to us in the 70s as a feminist development. And in some ways it was. All right. I'm actually going to admit, some ways it was. But it was also a way to hide the depression of wages in the 1970s. We went away from phonics because phonics doesn't work on certain keywords that people care about literature, but it actually still is really important for decoding. And we should have never gone away from it. I learned with phonics, even as a dyslexic and an aphasic. You guys can read my Twitter and know that I'm not lying about being dyslexic and aphasic. When I write books and articles, I have to have an editor. Yeah. But Blusker is exactly right. Human intelligence is a reflection of the larger society in which it comes from because intelligence is social. The ancient Greeks fucking realized that. Logos means to speak as well as to think. The logos is a social action. I've been complaining about how the wisdom of crowds is true, but if you really distort everyone's motivation, gust of popular sentiment, then the wisdom of crowds goes away. Where are we at? I don't mean to just invoke Joseph Tankter and Peter Turchin over and over and over again. Tankter doesn't really understand Marx. Turchin has nationalist limitations. But the overproduction of leaves, the overcomplication of knowledge economies, the physical infrastructure required to support those knowledge economies grows eventually too large for any society to support, not just a capitalist one, unless there are countervailing checks in that society. If you don't have those countervailing checks, you'll have an overproduction of elite that fights amongst itself and wastes more and more of resources on bullshit. See this cultural comp stuff? You wonder where it fucking comes from? And because of that, there's no way to build up organic projects, both between classes, which I don't even really want, but just so you know why you're not getting your class collaborative social compact back, and within them. You know what? I would even argue that, why when there's video? Okay, sure. I'm not even necessarily going to say that all the videos are bad, but there's no way you can get as much out of an even 3-hour video as you can out of a book. And most people that I know can't pay attention to a 3-hour video. No, God's plan, you're making sense. So no, phones have had a huge impact on illiteracy, as has AI, as has a lack of social infrastructure for reading, as has television, as has a lot of things. This is a multi-causal phenomenon. But what worries me more than the lack of literacy, right? I'm going to talk. I think I'm supposed to go on off BungaCast eventually, or BungaCast to talk about literacy problems, right? But also, it's the lack of people to discipline themselves. People talk about. I've been watching liberals just mock the male loneliness epidemic. They're not even denying it anymore. They're just mocking it. And I'm like, how does this help you? How does this help you? This is more about like you venting your id, but venting your id is not political discipline. God, even old liberals used to know this shit. Nicholas Carr is correct, actually, on the deep reading stuff. It's also why I tell people I'm a little bit skeptical of people counting audiobooks as the same thing as reading, but it's better than watching a video. So yeah, I mean, I've seen this, and I just don't get why you're doing that. I don't get what the purpose of this. You can talk about how like masculinity's been socially constructed in a way that's super limiting, and we need a new masculinity, I guess. Like I think that's like that. I could see that as a valid argument, but haha, male social loneliness is epidemic because men treat women like shit, and I'm like, what? But this is a fucking feedback loop. Like, toxic masculinity is probably a real thing, but most masculinity doesn't have to be fucking toxic. Yeah, everyone does treat everyone like shit. The one thing that you can see from the use of social media is decline of both strategic and essential empathy. What are your observations on nihilism in U.S. culture? It's blooming like fucking fungus. It's like spores and horse shit. But let's not blame the Zoomers for it, because that even in and of itself is missing the larger point. Why are the Zoomers incentivized to act that way? Why are they incentivized to weirder and weirder political extremes that don't even make any other sense? Right? Like, why? Why? Not that, but why? And look, we're not going to fully know why. It's overdetermined in the strict sense of that word. There are multiple things determining it. Yeah, boys are socialized in America in ways that lead to arrested development, and most people have had no real answer to that. And instead of trying to deal with it and deal with its social repercussions, which are socially damaging to all involved, we either pretend like women need to magically fix it, which they can't, or we blame the men for being socialized that way, as if they had a whole lot of other choices. No, not everyone turns out that way. Like, I get that. There's a lot of my audience, I hope, is not that way. But then you have to ask yourself, what happened to you that was beyond your control that gave you a wedge out of that worldview? Right? What gave you the wedge? Is it extrapolatable or not? No, I also agree that women are super lonely. I agree that the framing of the male loneliness epidemic is fucking not great. Although Women are socialized more to rely on friends in U.S. society, and actually in most Western societies, in ways that men are historically treated as not to do. But everyone's a lot lonelier and more atomized. Everybody is. How did I escape that worldview? That's a good question. I don't talk a lot about. I mean, I talk a lot about like elements of my political life, right? But and sometimes I reference my job, but in vague ways because I don't want to bring it up. But let's actually talk about this for a second. How did things turn out differently for me? One, I did not spend all of my life in the United States. Even though I'm blue collar, I was very lucky, very, very lucky that I got multiple outs from family members. Either first through the fact half my family lives in Canada, and then later on through the fact that I had some people help me write an application to get an exchange student program to Germany my sophomore year of college, not my junior year, my sophomore year. Which is why like the magic of Europe doesn't quite work on me. And then during the Great Recession, I had a friend who got me a job in Korea, which enabled me to get into the international teaching surgery. All right. I would love to pretend that that was all me, but I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to abuse survivor's bias in that way. I'm not going to do that shit. I'm going to tell you flat out that yes, I had to do work. Yes, I had to outshine, particularly as a person from no fucking background at all. But I didn't get this by my own work. I got this because I knew somebody. I had to impress them, but I knew somebody. The other thing is, I grew up in a household of boys. My mom's dead now, so I can talk about it. My mom struggled with addiction in the last part of her life. She nursed Jackie herself. My father left her when she was pregnant with me. She got out by marrying decently. She married her high school sweetheart. Now, this story, you might go, oh, Varn, that's cute. You know, it's your birthday, reminisce, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you this for a sociological reason. All right. I had to face the fact that my mom, who, when I was 3 to 5 years old, was home insecure to the point that I either lived with family or lived in a car. Yeah, I was born in Augusta, Georgia, and I grew up in Macon, Georgia. Oh no, there's like I agree with a lot of what you were saying on let me respond to that in a second. So I knew that my mom survived by dependency on men, many of whom were very bad to her. And I also have bonded with my mom through trauma. I know, therapeutic bullshit, blah, 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 but this is real. I was a 3-year-old who didn't necessarily have a house, who was living with his mother in a car. Which, by the way, tells you a lot about my background. Now, my background wasn't always like that. There were periods in my childhood where my family was thoroughly lower middle to middle class, but they lost it over and over again. And my mom did everything she could to do what you were supposed to do. She started off as a waitress. She used that to leverage herself to get some typing classes. She tried to work as a secretary at a small corporation in Georgia. That did not work because there were a set of layoffs in the recessions that came in the middle 80s. Then she tried to be a housewife, but she had 4 kids, and they could not support 4 kids off of even a very good mechanic salary. And my stepfather lost his job 3 times between 1988 and 1994. She had 2 very sick kids. Healthcare was unbelievably expensive. And like the shit that JD Vance romanticizes but also condemns in Hillbilly Elegy, a lot of that was my life too. right? I grew up in a mostly black neighborhood that my parents actually tried to get us out of. Not so much because I had a problem with black people per se, although that low key racism was definitely there. But because it was a way to like stabilize into the middle class. My stepdad is the only person is my only parent that is still alive. Yes, he's 70 something, 71 as of this year. So I grew up in a very class unstable background in the blue collar. My father was lumping. He was either a salesman or a con man, depending on the time of his life. He also had some kind of late Fordish jobs that went away. He used to work for a power plant for a little while, and he worked for a water treatment plant. But mostly, what he did was a chicanery and salesmanship, which tells you how I feel about that. And my brothers have ranged the spectrum of what you would say millennial life is. One of my brothers has been in and out of prison. He's been on probation 24 out of 26 years. He dropped out of high school at 14. He has been drug addled since about that time. I have another brother who got a PhD to be a physical therapist, and also has a upper middle class life, but is highly downwardly mobile now due to the pressures of Trump. Coincidentally, he is a Trump agnostic conservative. And then I have another brother who had no formal education until his 30s, but who makes a ton of money and is a good liberal now. Right? They all had problems. They all had the problems of the middle class. A lot of them struggled in and out of prison. Only 2 of us finished high school, and we also the people who got higher level degrees. I tell you this because that changes your perspective when you go up and down the class ladder a lot. I have met billionaires in the course of my work abroad. I don't say that to brag, all right, because it's not like it helped me much. But I say that I actually do know what that culture is like. I was mocked by a colleague when I was in an MFA for assuming that people who made $200,000 in 2004 money were rich. And you know what? That person was right to mock me. I had no idea what the upper end of the class spectrum was. Now I do. I have worked for them directly. So, yes, that gives you a broad perspective, and not everyone gets lucky like that. It's not because I'm like, awesome. Yeah, I'm super smart, but that was never going to be enough. Being super smart, like, we're on a planet of 8 billion people. Even if you assume only 1% is super smart, how many people is that? So I can deal with people who come from relatively high privilege backgrounds. I understand the purpose of woke social codes. In fact, I would say some of them are benevolent, but a lot of them actually exist to hide people's origins so you don't have to deal with it in contested social spaces like universities. That's part of what's really going on. When was I born? I was born in 1980, yes. I was born in the last few months of the Carter administration. If someone says civilizational decline happens, I think this current one is actually really, really bad, like Bronze Age collapse bad. But nonetheless, human race will probably survive. Might be under really shitty conditions. I mean, common ruin is a possibility, my socialist friends. Common ruin is not techno-feudalism. Common ruin is a civilizational collapse, which happens. It happens. It happens all the time. Why do you think the left is so associated with the middle and upper class in the modern day? Because the left chose, for a variety of reasons, to focus on professionals after the 1960s. And when they tried to salt working class institutions in the 70s, those working class institutions were A, under assault, and B, they did not know how to work in those cultures. Even though some of them were from those cultures by habitus and birth, which is why it's birth, like your class of birth is not the most important thing about you. It matters. Thunder Warrior showing up any day now. Deep 40K lore reference. Thank you, Buskar. So I just say this to say that, like, we need to be patient with a lot of people, but we also need to not we shouldn't let them get away with getting all this bullshit so much. We really shouldn't. All right. There's been a lot of valid points back and forth about the male loneliness epidemic, which I admit is phrased shittily. We should say the male socialization epidemic and the human loneliness epidemic, or the human atomization epidemic and the male poor socialization in that response. But that doesn't have a good. It's not catchy. Now, Vante Barbari. I hope Amber alias before writing fiction. Oh boy. Yeah, me too. The funny thing about me is I never wanted to be a political analyst or a political pundit. I really didn't. The 2008 crisis led me to get out of my sort of liberal starry-eyedness about aesthetics. Well, you know, some of them retired to Silver Lake at 40. See, people will be aliens, I hope. Oh God. Oh man, I don't want to get into the amounts of power it takes to do faster than light travel, but whatever. I have no idea what's going on in Ukraine. I'm not in Ukraine. I mean, I follow it as best I can, but I don't trust any news source on it, both like really. And I feel like I'm always trying to triangulate what's actually going on. And that's true for most wars, by the way. So I've gotten a lot less willing to pontificate on that, other than like we probably shouldn't totally trust NATO. That's really where I start and stop. Thoughts on Jay Posada? I don't know, man. Yeah, I'm about to see people argue about Ukraine for half an hour. Amount of power that we know of don't kill my home. Okay, sure. There might be alternate power sources that are nearly infinite. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just highly unlikely. Well, you know how I got that way. The reason why I sit in front of, but these aren't even like history books. These are mostly poetry books. But like, I read as much as I can, and as widely as I can. I'm not just reading left polemics and left theory. Okay. Like, I'm really not. Like, in fact, a lot of that shit's bad for you. The theory will avoid empirically verifiable facts. I mean, theory is important, don't get me wrong, but theory will avoid empirically verifiable facts and non-facts, and then the polemics are often so loose with their history to try to win a point that it just doesn't mean much. Do you regret all the time that you've invested into your learning? I wish I started exercising along with it earlier in my life. Because I did, but I was in my late 30s when I started doing that. You know, I don't want to go into inspirational things because I'm still a big guy. Like, I'm not a small man. I definitely am not hitting my BMI. But I used to be over 300 and some pounds. I lost part of my stomach from typhoid, but I also lost about like 70 of those pounds just by leaving the United States and changing my lifestyle. And it wasn't that I thought to change my lifestyle. It was the lifestyle that was reinforced for me. I walked everywhere. Coming back to the States, I've been able to keep some of that weight off through self-discipline, but it's harder. So I don't know why I'm talking about this, except that like your social context matters, but you have some choice over your social context. Oh, I know physical health helps the intellect. Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, it does. Your brain needs energy, and you need an efficient body to process that energy. It's just not that's we're not dualist in that way. What did you? Where did you start to get into a poetry? I don't know, man. I got into poetry when I was 13 years old. Because like a lot of people do, I guess I was my mother. Well, okay, so this actually is a complication. My mother was going to school to be a nurse when I was just starting high school, and I left home at 16. Right, but so just so you know a little bit more about me, I guess. But during that time period, she was exposed to a whole lot of stuff. She'd bring it home, and I would just read it. So I started. I guess I picked up her Norton Anthology of Literature when I was in, I think, 8th grade, and just started reading it. So I started reading like Milton and Charles Olson, who I did not understand, and whatever was just in that fucking anthology. I would also do that at home. I mean, we didn't consistently have entertainment in the same way. You know, I spent a lot of time talking to friends on the phone in the 90s, but I also, when I was bored, I would open the school textbooks and just read them, particularly the history and English textbooks, but also the science textbooks. The only one I didn't do that with was the math textbook. Now, there's a lot of bullshit propaganda in those books, and I actually started realizing that very young. But you know, it just got me interested in stuff like poetry because I started getting interested, like, how did people keep knowledge before writing? And I got into poetry as kind of a reflection of that. Oh my God, I love Beowulf. This is a big thing. Poetry is so hard to evaluate. Most things are hard to evaluate. What's some poets and writers I wish were read more? I wish that the leftist poets that people liked were better than the ones they like Neruda and Brecht. And Pissarnik is really interesting. What's your take on the Chinese poetic tradition? I like Chinese poetry, although it doesn't really translate into English, and I don't understand Mandarin, so I'm not going to claim to actually have a grasp of it in any meaningful sense. You know, I'm not going to be that kind of like cultural imperialist or whatever who just claims that I understand something because I read a translation of it. Even when I try to get into things like ancient Greek stuff, I don't think I'm an expert because I don't read the original language. Oh, a lot of people don't get poetry. And I think one thing is people over focus on getting it. It's a memory technology and a musical technology. Right? So like if you remember that the sounds and then the images and the impressions go first, Logos usually comes later, depending on the poetic time period and tradition you're dealing with, and that's going to vary. And it needs to be memorable enough to be recited until the modern period where technology ends the need for totally ends the need for recitation. Just go with the flow with it first. Yes, you should read poetry out loud to yourself. I have a bunch of Chinese poetry and post-glacial systems coming up. Like a shelf full of it over here somewhere. Anyway. I don't know if it's true that you either get the poem or you don't, but I think you either feel the poem or you don't, just like you either feel a song or you don't. And I'm not here to say everyone needs to like learn poetry. Like that would be such a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, I think it's good for you, but I think it's a way to retrain the way you think about language. But I'm not here to try to convince you it's the most important thing in the world. I used to hate that about poets, actually, even when I was not a fire breathing radical like I am today. I used to really detest like poets pretending that we were the unacknowledged legislatures of humanity. I'm like, we're the gust of popular sentiment at best. Like, and that has a function, and we do matter. But man, this romanticization of like artisans is a weird thing. I love art. I love all kinds of art, film, art, and I'm a snob when it comes to art. But I also like lowbrow art. I mean, I'll talk shit movies with Jason Miles and J.G. Michaels all day. I've gotten a lot into film, maybe at the expense of my reading in the past couple years, although I still read a lot. I actually kind of like Billy Collins. Who do I like this Pan by the Intellectia? Ooh, that's a good question. Let me just look back here. Thomas Lux. I mean, although Pan by the Intellectual is weird because Thomas Lux taught at Sarah Lawrence, but he was one of the least academic pretentious guys in the world. Now, I like a lot of academic pretentious poetry, honestly. I like Charles Olson a lot. I like Jeffrey Hill a lot. In fact, up here you can see. Actually, you can't see it; it's out of vision. Never mind. There's a lot of my favorite books are up there. I mean, Jason and I disagree on takes all the time, but takes on art really kind of don't matter. Yes, I do read fiction. I don't read as much of it as I used to. When I say the far right is a middle class movement, okay, I guess you guys got tired of poetry talk. I'd like to thank Boss Core for getting me to care about art again. Any chance of you explore video games as an art form? No, but not because I don't think they're an art form. I just don't like. I'm just not. I feel about video games the way a lot of people feel about poetry. Oh, I love Michael Shea. Good call. I like Amy Cesare. I like Ami Cesare. I like Lorca. But anyway, would you say the far right is a middle class movement? I say the far right is a mixture of the lower tier of the very elite, which is why you have so many of these like people around Trump who are posit as anti-establishment establishment people who are from Harvard. It is parts of the petite bourgeois, parts of the lumpen, and frankly, parts of the lumpenized blue collar working class. You're never getting Varn thoughts on Disco Elysium, but people have been trying to get me to play that game for like 7 years. So yeah, I would say that there's a downward trajectory of. I mean, it is. I do think Marx's insights about Bonaparte actually do explain a lot of what you see on the far right. Now, the conservative right is actually a different deal, because conservative right was more rooted in traditional ways of life, the peasantry, a more stable petite bourgeoisie, which is why they're kind of going away. It's why the right and conservatives really aren't the same thing anymore. Have you read Song of Ice and Fire? Yes. What do you think of it? It's overambitious and confused and a product of the Bush years, but kind of fun, sort of. Thoughts on feminism, good or bad for socialism? Which kind of feminism? What? Feminism is such an abstract at this point that I like I don't know what people mean by it anymore. What about text-heavy games? Planescape Torment. I did play Planescape Torment when I was a teenager, and I loved it. I played it at a friend's house. Like I think largely my freshman year of college. Yeah, the feminism is especially the false economy because A, there's a lot of feminism, B, there's a lot of female workers. I don't. It's just I'm. It's a weird debate point. Do I love like current liberal feminism would lean in? No. But I think that stuff is going away now anyway. I have not read any of Kashmir. I can tell you, Mexico. Somebody asked, where would I immigrate to? I mean, I know. Latin America, heartbeat. No questions. I also kind of like Eastern Europe, but I don't think I would immigrate there. I mean, I probably would be happy in China if I was willing to learn Chinese, to be honest. But Mexico, Spanish isn't a hard language. Mexico has always been good to me. I've lived there before. I have a pension there. Seriously, I do. Not much of one. I mean, I've probably run out of it in a year, but I have it. I'm gonna show this up. Well, it's just I always tell I work with a lot of Spanish speaking kids, and I'm just like, mi español es muy gringo. Extreme gringo español action. Leo DiCaprio Spanish and OPA reminded me of you, Varn, in the best way. Totally fair. Like, totally fucking fair. I technically supposedly can speak German. I passed the German fluency test in university and also went to München. But you guys hear how I speak German now? Yeah. Language structures and words stick with me, but language like pronunciation doesn't, and I'm not quite sure why. This is true for English too. I'll know how to say a word and still accidentally say it wrong all the time. Like thoughts on being a teacher. I would not tell people. I don't know that I would tell people to do it anymore. I think it's a socially important function. I really do. I don't want to pretend like I'm doing the Lord's work. I get annoyed with that, like, oh, the poor teacher. We're out there saving the children. A teacher has a contradictory position in society. We both are supposed to enable the children to succeed, and we're supposed to sort them. But I do think the educational part of what we do is important. I also think it's a social reproduction function that probably should be handled by general society more than a specialized class of teachers. But you do, like, all societies have had a specialized class of teachers at some level in some capacity, even relatively egalitarian ones. But right now, I don't know that I tell people to do it. I really don't know. I joked with a friend of mine. It was like, if I had kids, which I don't, but if I had kids, what would I say if my son or daughter told me they would become a teacher? I'd be like, well, why did you waste your education? Which is terrible, because I actually think it's important. I do think social reproduction is something socialists have to take seriously. But I also think, like, it's becoming like journalism. I mean, I can see this in the people I work with. It's becoming like journalism stuff that you either have to be well married or have money to do it anymore, because you have to have other means of earning. Not because teachers are like live on a poverty salary. I mean, if you look at them compared to the average a worker in America, they're still in the top like 60% in most places. But the debt that it increasingly requires, the treatment, the ineffectuality, the fact that teachers really do want to stop this literacy crisis and have no idea how. Like, those are hard. Those are hard questions. Let's see. People ask what fiction I read recently. I actually do like Thomas Pynchon a lot. Victor Pelevin, the Russian writer. Again, don't read Russian, but what I've read in translation is really great. Obviously William Volman, even though he's an anti-communist, and that bugs me. Yeah, I have PTSD, and I'm against the therapeuticization of these things. I am very against them being weaponized the way they're being weaponized. But I've had to deal with so many people who, like, being a teacher is like being so many different kinds of social workers, where you see horrible shit, but you do also see good shit. It's how much it's going to affect you. Do you read manga? I have the entire collection of Berserk right over there. So yes, obviously. Woo, Jason, thank you. We appreciate you, buddy. Are there any parades that don't exist that you think should? Parades? Parodies? Parades? I don't know. I don't like parades. Marching around. Where does your Discord handle come from? It's a joke. Someone once told me Butlerian Jihad was Islamophobic, so I decided to make it Butlerian Hospitalar, which means someone who fights against technology but wants to heal the wounded. I got you. Did you read Tazaka's Buddha? Yes, I have. How many bad kids do you have this year? I would say, like, truly sociopathic children, maybe 1 in 100 every year. I teach like 300 kids to like 3, 4. I mean, there's kids who misbehave. There's kids who can't control themselves. There's kids who have deep, 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 deep problems. But kids who are bad in the sense that they're actively malicious, 1 out of 100. Now kids who don't know how to comport themselves are disruptive. Oh God, like 50%. What is your approach to reading ideological enemies? I try to take them at face value first to build a model of their mind, and then try to see from that model of mind where they would be lying. Do you think the American geoinglism will spin into actual operations on Mexican soil by U.S. operators? I think it is more likely to happen in Venezuela than Mexico. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. That's something I actually fret a lot about. What are they as crazy as advertised? Janaffa, I just started teaching them. Like I teach high schoolers. Janaffa is still very young. I think the first batch just hit high school, and I don't teach freshmen this year. My suspect is I don't deal with them in the same way because I work a lot online, and they respond to me pretty well. What I can tell you is everyone I meet under 25 is highly alienated and uncomfortable with social interaction in person. What do I teach? Now I teach I teach English language arts. I teach creative writing. I teach film sometimes. I teach technical writing. I teach introduction to higher ed for students who don't know how to navigate college. I actually do that specifically to help working class students get a leg up when they go in the university system if they do. And I teach what else do I teach? Yeah, that's all of it right now. I have taught history before. I don't have a history license in Utah, but I have in other states. I have taught government before. I have taught in university. I've taught Commonwealth English culture. I've taught all kinds of advanced literature classes, and I've taught how to teach non-English speakers English. Oh yeah, and I work on the ELD department. For those of you who don't know, I work with a lot of non-English speakers and teach them how to speak English. In fact, that's a lot of my job. Do I think sociopathic kids are that way naturally or due to home circumstances? I would say it's about 50-50. I have met kids when I met their parents, and I'm like, I don't know how this happened. But I have also met the other. I guess the question is, even if the kids aren't, if it isn't parents, is it some other social force? And again, I don't know. I think a lot about that. I really do. I think it's probably a combination of both. Yeah. Lots of stuff about the U.S. federal law enforcement. Yeah, that wasn't great. So yeah. Well, I'm gonna go do the rest of the stuff for my birthday. I'm gonna go watch a movie, spend some time with the people I love, and not think about this or for fuck's sake, not argue on X. I know I came out of cosmonaut calling today. Again over the Graham Platner stuff. I want people to remember though, I don't think that these people are not comrades. Like, I think this is a strategic mistake, but it's not something I'm going to kick people out the left. How the fuck do I kick people out of the left? I mean, what do I do? Not let them on my show? Like, a few thousand people a week listen to me, which is not insignificant, but like, you know, it's not like I don't know, whatever Crystal Ball does or whatever. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for spending time with me on my 45th birthday. I got a few things to do. Spend some of my family. Oh, I also have another interview to do tonight. Shit, I forgot about that. Take care. Protect your peace.